It's the truth that's crushing.
It is often the truth that is crushing. We need to talk about what the writers and the director of From said about this show, the things that they have confirmed, debunked, denied, and changed when it comes to From and what it means for the future of this show. Starting with, when is this show actually coming back?
Season 1 and 2, we filmed the show late fall, and we were out of Halifax by Christmas. There were all these rumors. It's amazing, the knowledge that shows up online. There were a slew of rumors that the show would not be on the air until 2026. We're wildly hopeful that it will be on the air in 2025.
Is huge. I would love for it to be here by 2025. But as fans, we don't know all the behind the scenes and the stuff that goes into it. Can you kind of give us an idea of like what takes a season? Like what goes in? Is it scheduling? Is it location?
Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. We're probably not going to be done shooting until the holidays. So in likelihood, it would be early 2026. No.
In likelihood, it'll be early 2026.
Right. Okay. All right.
2027, and then everybody will be happy.
Exactly. Yeah.
So get that squared away. The show most likely will not be coming out at earliest 2026. They already confirmed that they like to shoot in fall, which means that at best they'll be done shooting in winter of 2025. There's no way a show that gets done being shot in winter of 2025 is fully edited, fleshed out, and completely produced by 2025. The show will be coming back in 2026, and I'm even going to add that that's if things go as planned. You never know what's going to happen, even with just the production of the show, let alone the world. So do not be surprised if we look up and we don't get season 4 until 2027. Do not be surprised if things change and this ends up in 2027. Do not be surprised if this interview does not age well. Which brings me directly into the next thing I need to touch now. Now, let me get this out of the way for the people who aren't going to watch the whole video and be quick to comment what they believe.
So to be clear, yeah, season 4 script, not done yet.
Not done yet.
Okay.
So there it is. No debating in my comments about whether or not this show has been fully written. They have already confirmed in both interviews, but this was the most straightforward clip. This show has not been finished being written, period. It is never done being written. And as we will talk about more in the rest of this video, they are changing things as they go. That is completely confirmed. So before you jump in my comments to talk about what another creator told you or what some other summary told you about what the writer said and say that the story has been written, that is simply not the case. A lot of people are misinterpreting what the writers actually said, and they're not listening to what the rest of the interview and the things that they say actually means for how much of this plot has been written. The writers themselves confirmed that the mythology of the show is finished. They know how the show began because of the mythology, and they know how the show is going to end because of the mythology.
So we started from a mythology that was very, very thorough, and yet also still had aspects of it that could be filled in. So we had a really solid foundation when it comes to that. We also, from a narrative standpoint, know the ending of the show, as we said, and a lot of the significant events along the way.
Well, I know the overall. I know where we end up, and yet I don't know. If you're, I know where we're going, so where we arrive. I don't know exactly every little nook and cranny that gets us there.
That is not the same thing as what a lot of people are hearing what they're saying and taking from what they're saying. The story itself, the plot, the shifts, the details, the small changes that they're making were all already written, especially not written since season 1. This is not a finished story. This is something they're changing along the way. They know what the mythology they've based this show off of is and what that means for the beginning and the end of this show and most of the major plot points that they have at least planned. But they are going along and changing things as they go, creating completely whole new plot points as they go.
Sure. And we trust each other enormously, and we have reinvented scripts, 2 days before shooting, or scenes or sequences. So it's very collaborative, and the team up there.
Literally, but right before filming new seasons, the show is not written, especially not in detail, and a lot of things that we're watching are being made up as they go. They simply know the mythology and how the mythology plays into how this show is supposed to end. But they are changing things along the way, and they are adding plots, side quests. They're making happy coincidences. They're leaving breadcrumbs that have no plan, and they're going back and they're changing things in order to create this story. That is not the same thing as what a lot of creators are running with and summarizing and saying has been said, which is that the story has always been written in detail and that everything we're watching has always been the plan. That is not what is happening in From. And a lot of us who picked up on this because a lot of the changes they have made are starting to create plot holes. We're not wrong. We were actually right. So that rant was longer than I wanted it to be. But the point of this video is to talk about, number one, all the things they debunked and answered and confirmed about this plot, what that means for this show. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to return to some of the biggest changes they've already made to the show that are why I was saying that I knew they were changing things as they went along and what that means for the show and why this could be dangerous. So if you're not interested in that last half of the video, that is fine. Timestamps will be on this video. But now let's talk about the things that are confirmed and debunked about From so far. Like this video, hit the subscribe button, comment whatever you think so far, and let's get right into it.
It's not purgatory, and it's not a dream.
Okay, right now, the Matrix simulation is out there.
Yeah, I would stand by. It's not purgatory, and it's not a dream or a nightmare. And
Okay.
I would say that at this point, it could be anything anybody sees or thinks it is.
Okay, so aliens could be on the table. Maybe.
I mean, if somebody believes aliens are controlling it or aliens are their aliens, let them live and be well. I'm not going to go there.
So there you have it. It's completely confirmed. They are not in purgatory and it is not a dream. And it is also pretty much, he basically confirms it's not a simulation either. And they are not aliens. This show is very clearly based off of a real physical place that all these people have really ended up in, and they're really physically encountering all the things that they're seeing. Now, I'll even go as far as to say that also includes that my dreamscape theory, although a dreamscape is not the same thing as a dream, their tone at which they approach it not being a dream to me makes me think that that whole concept as well is probably not what it is either. The mythology that they do have is clearly the answer to it all. So the question is, what is this mythology? What mythology are they actually using? We all know that it very clearly has some Norse mythology in the show, but how much is it all Norse mythology, or is it a lot of different mythologies mixed in for one bigger, greater mythology that could potentially be at play? That is the question to me. I know that there's Norse mythology in this show, but the question is, how much of what we're seeing is the actual Norse mythology, and what parts have they used of that mythology, and is their mythology almost completely their own based off of a couple different mythologies? That is where we should be entering when we continue to create theories about From. What mythologies are all at play here, and what realm are they in based off of said mythologies?
With Smiley, did they choose not to run, or is it the fact that they just never could? Because people.
I think that answer is actually in Kenny's speech in episode 2 of season 1.
Those things, they walk. They never run. You ever notice that? It's like they're taking their time because they know there's only so many places we can go. I think we're running out of spaces on the board there.
So now it's confirmed they can run, but they choose to walk. They walk because they know that these people have nowhere to go. And it also plays into a bigger theory that I've had in previous videos of how all of this is a game that the main entity loves to play. All of this game foreshadowing and clues and details in the show are intentional, and I believe they are one of the few intentional details actually at play. This also confirms that a lot of people's theories that they run when they need to at a few different points throughout the show we've already seen is 100% true, including when Miranda made it to the faraway tree and Smiley ran her down. That was obviously because he needed to beat her to it and keep her from getting to the tree. So we might see them run again, maybe at some point later down the line, or we may never see them run again at all, but they can run, they just choose not to.
Do the monsters eat the organs?
Stay tuned.
Okay, I'll take that too.
Now, stay tuned is an answer they used a couple different times throughout the interview, and I want to give context. They have already confirmed that although they try not to write this show according to the things that are online, according to fan theories, according to fan wants and dislikes, it is clear that some of the biggest changes they have made to the show are from the aspect of what a fan would like to see or want, regardless of if that is because they saw it online or that is something that they actually predicted on their own. So they are saying to stay tuned to a lot of different answers that could potentially be retconned into the show. So keep that in mind whenever they say that stay tuned, all these things. That does not mean that was always the answer. That does not mean that was always the plan, but it does mean it could go on to become the plan, or it could be something that they want to keep in the back of their mind as a potential plan. Like they have said, things that they plant seeds for that they might come back and answer. Now, in my opinion, I always thought that the monsters were eating the organs or at least doing something with them. And now with what I believe the monsters are, which will be another video, I believe that potentially they're at least using them for something, if not still actually eating them. So that is something to keep in mind.
Monsters that we all loved, the way they looked, the way they moved, and we do our best to get them back. But sometimes people have lives, right?
Sure.
Especially background people, even though they're far from just.
So there you have it. It's exactly like I was saying in my last video. There's been way too many production changes, whether that means actors who did not come back, actors or actresses, and the way things have been shot, that it is impossible to actually put a number to how many monsters are supposed to be in Fromville. Now, you could go ahead and guess and say that at the end of season 3, episode 10, that is the official number. You can guess that the people in white on the wall in the cave painting, maybe that's the official number, and that is not the accurate as, and that is not the same thing as 12 either. Or on the right side where you see all the people in red, way more than 12, maybe that's the answer you want to run with. I don't have an answer for you, so they're gonna have to figure out how to answer this canonically for us on how many monsters are in town. If that is ever going to be a plan, they might never answer that at all, so keep that in mind. Now, this next piece reveals a lot. I don't even think he was actually supposed to say this, but it debunks a lot of theories, including mine.
You know, John said at one point, well, the monsters were all around the last generation of people who were here, humans. And so I came up with everybody iconic, the milkman.
So there you have it. A lot of you guys in my comments were actually right, and I ended up being wrong, I think. But he literally confirmed that the monsters are supposed to be from the last generation of people, aka all the people who were before in Victor's cycle. They are at least dressed like they are from Victor's cycle. So again, it could mean that these are people from Victor's cycle. He forgot what they looked like. Another thing he forgot or has erased from his own memory. Or that they're simply dressed to be like the people from the last cycle. But this is a huge detail that no one is talking about that basically confirms that these monsters we're watching might actually be from the last cycle, and that the child sacrifice might have actually happened in the last cycle, which I believe ruins the entire show and makes a lot of things we figured out not make any sense at all. So we'll see how this goes. And to add on to this, I'm going to clarify something I said in my last video. Not everything the monsters are wearing is from the 1950s. It's absolutely not. Some of these things date to prior to the 1950s, and some of the things they're wearing are actually found in the 70s. So by the last generation, he might mean the 1900s as a total, because we know the last cycle was 1978. But that does not put all of these monsters in the 1950s. It's the whole entire basically 20th century at that point, which is why some of the clothes they're wearing does not all date to the 1950s, like I've seen some of you guys say in my comments, which is why I did not believe that they were from the last cycle. But now it might be confirmed that all of these monsters are from Victor's cycle, or at least are supposed to appear to be. Again, we still do not know until it is canonically confirmed, but we'll see what happens.
Get to see what the tarot cards were going to say. Do you know what tarot cards were going to be revealed before it got interrupted by the crow, raven, bird?
Okay, here's the truth. I knew we weren't going to see them. Honestly, I don't know what they were. Okay. You could probably come up with, if you really know the tarot and the studying of that and what that all is, you could probably come up with some scenario that you think has played out. But that was not our intention, or I should say, that was nothing that I worked to achieve.
Okay.
Now, this is another oversight that is concerning because, again, another thing I'll get into more at the end of this video, but the tarot cards were never meant to be seen, and therefore there was no actual meaning asserted to them. There was no actual meaning assigned to them. Now, you can look at this a couple different ways, but to me, this only further speaks to the lack of detail orientation that is actually in this show. What do you mean her tarot card reading didn't have an answer, or at least you didn't have a concept in mind onto why we would be using the tarot cards? Therefore, you would actually know how the tarot cards work. To me, this speaks to a bigger issue I put my finger on a few videos ago that I'm not going to get into too much detail until the end of this video, but there's a lack of reverence for a lot of the things they're referencing, whether that's tarot cards, whether that's the King in Yellow, Mabuse, the mythologies that they're using, the cultures that are present in this show. They're using them, but they're not actually thinking about the way that they're being used and how much detail that should have went into it, because those concepts are important to the people that actually care about those. So in assigning a lot of meaning to these moments that is not there, they are then trying to not say anything, and they're saying things like stay tuned, happy accidents, and details the audience is catching. Something to keep in mind as we continue to get more answers on this show. But again, there was no answer to her tarot cards. There was nothing to it. It was just something they put in the show.
Sara ever have worms?
No.
No.
Good. That's fine. Good.
No.
So finally, we don't have to worry about nothing else. Sara did not have worms. It was just something that looked similar to the worms, but you know, that was unintentional. It was never supposed to be connected. Something that I think a lot of us kind of already knew from jump, that those things were not supposed to be connected, and that Sara never had the worms. But a lot of people, of course, were looking for so many details, and it's starting to get crazy at this point. Some of the theories people are coming up with and the details that are not connected that people are connecting that should know that they're not connected. And Sara having the worms was one of them. Sara never had the worms. It is completely separate, and those things are not connected, which opens up a bigger conversation about some of the theories people have that I've seen in my comments. And some of these theories are starting to get out of hand on connecting things that are not connected at all, because we're paying too close attention to some of these physical details, like Sara having things on her arm or Ethan wearing yellow at the beginning of the season, that don't actually make sense if you consider the plot, the foreshadowing, and what's actually happening in the show, in the dialogue we are being told. Again, a lot of these things are connected, but we're making connections that are not there because we're too focused on what we're looking at and not what we look at actually means.
Well, that particular part of the sign, star magic or whatever that is broken. It's not there. There's just the frame. The weather is harsh in from. And I would say that it was broken because time had passed.
Something I was right about in one of my previous videos. The town is aging and getting older because it was supposed to be new for the last cycle. Now, how this plays into the rest of the cycles we've seen, the numbers in the lighthouse, I don't know, because now we've had certain things that they have said in this interview that throw off, again, majority of the theories you see on YouTube. If the monsters we're watching are actually from Victor's cycle and they sacrificed the children in the 1900s, then how do we now justify the rest of what we've seen in the show? There's a lot.
Well, it's not Anghkooey, I'll say that, which came out of Griffin's head. I would say it's whatever you want it to be, and whatever significance Mabuse has to you, go with God.
Okay.
So this now confirms two different things. Number one, Anghkooey was always a made-up word. Although we have found interpretations that link to different languages, and the closest one we ended up finding out was the Native American version of it, at the end of the day, it's all made up. And I've seen a theory floating around that I'm not sure where anybody got it from, that the actual children themselves are somehow Native American actually. I was not trying to instill that in anybody when I found the definition of Anghkooey. Those children are very clearly not Native American. They're very clearly European white children. I was just trying to find meaning to the word. And I didn't think it was a coincidence that seeing Native American culture present in this show and a word that is very close to its Native American interpretation, it is what it is. At the end of the day, none of that matters. The show made up that word for the show. It's Hordor. Now, The other thing I wanted to talk about from that clip is Mabuse. I've talked to you guys about this in my Man in Yellow video that is already up on my channel, but I'll say more about it again here. Mabuse, the King in Yellow, HP Lovecraftian culture, Cthulhu, maybe even the Norse mythology that we're watching, literally everything in this show that you have identified clearly links to something you've watched before, read before, real life, whatever it is, are nothing but cultural or literary references. The answer is not that. Mabuse is not our villain. He's not the guy we're all looking for that is the big bad of this show. He is nothing but a reference, because if he was the actual villain, the director would know. So Mabuse is not our villain. He might at best be a literary reference they snuck into the show that we've seen happen in multiple different shows and movies. That's something that they do.
One thing that'll another bit of insider info. In the original pilot, the character of Jade was an 18-year-old girl who was returning from spring break. And the one thing that, like, as we were starting season 1, Jeff had said, like, character of Jade, she doesn't really have a purpose. We knew, we've all seen how season 3 pays off, and that was always the payoff for the character, but the design of the character. She just didn't really, she seemed a little bit redundant to Julie. She didn't really have a place. She didn't really have a story. And
She didn't have a job.
She didn't have a job, yeah. And so I think it was you, Jeff, that said, you're like, so what are we missing? Like, what if she's a flash billionaire? And then we broke the story. We broke the idea of, like, okay, just like everything that Jade became.
And importantly, a genius with a point of view and an opinion of this place, and somebody who could help us tell the story.
Exactly. And then I remember writing episode 3, and it was when it was at the choosing ceremony when he starts going, "Oh no, Frank, please don't go." It was like in that moment, I was like, "Oh, that's Jade."
Now, this is an example of a really good change. I like the character of Jade, but also, too, now knowing she was supposed to be an 18-year-old girl, some of his dialogue actually makes more sense under the context of who he was supposed to be, although it still works with who he is now. But another added thing that, although this change was good, still points to an area of concern is that if Jade was supposed to be an 18-year-old girl in this cycle, it makes me question how planned was the reincarnation of characters actually in this show. Was that always a plan, or was this another thing they changed along the way and used a seed that they had planted to change the outcome of a huge plot point? Something they've done multiple times that I'm going to talk about more later on in this show. But again, it is an area of concern. So now I wonder how planned was reincarnation, because as some of you guys know, some of us have felt like it was not the actual plan.
So years ago, probably about 15 years ago, I was driving down Los Feliz Boulevard, which is a place in Los Angeles, and I passed by, it's the corner of Los Feliz and Riverside, for anybody who knows the geography. There's a fountain. There's a big fountain before you get on 5. And as I was driving past, I saw this man in a canary yellow suit. He had a matching fedora, and he was just dancing and moving with such joy. It was like it wasn't like normal. Like, it looked like an angel trying out his body for the first time. Like it felt magical. Like, to the point where, like, I couldn't take my eyes off him as I drove by. And it was one of those things. Wow, that guy, like, almost felt like something unreal, unnatural. Flash forward to, I think it was like 4, maybe 5 years later. I'm driving up Cahuenga Pass, which is on the other side of Hollywood. And I'm driving up Cahuenga Pass about to get on the 101, and I see the same man in the same yellow suit. Only now it's tattered and it's worn, and his posture is weak and defeated, and all the joy has been washed out of him. And it felt like I had somehow drifted onto the margins of something magical. Like, we're in between when I had seen him first and saw him again years later. He had gone on this quest and he had somehow failed, or he had lost. And I'm seeing.
So first, in my opinion, I believe that this debunks the Man in Yellow being the King in Yellow theory and the Man in Yellow being Mabuse theory. They could still be literary references that they use to flesh this character out and decide how he was going to operate, but I don't believe that that is the answer. Now, let's talk about what he actually did say, because this might confirm one of my theories. He references the Man in Yellow as someone he saw that looked like an angel. That is something we've also seen them place in the dialogue for another character when Elgin references the kimono lady. I do not believe this is a coincidence at all. Then he goes on to say that when he saw this man in a yellow suit later on, he was tattered up, a disheveled version of himself, but he looked like he failed a quest. My theory might be correct, that the Man in Yellow, the kimono lady, and the cicada monster, who might actually potentially be Martin in disguise, were all potentially past residents of the town who failed their version of a quest and became entities the exact same way as the other entities we see in Fromville, all the parents who sacrificed their children. This might be the running pattern on how you become an entity in the town. By failing whatever challenge, whatever game, they are all being challenged to play. The man in yellow might be this angel that John turned into an entity in town, a past resident, evidenced by the actual painting itself, who looks like a younger version of himself in a much cleaner suit with brown hair, and later on is now this entity we see in Fromville. The same way the kimono lady might be someone who was from the town, and the cicada monster, which means that Martin most likely also is the actual cicada monster, are both past residents in the town who were turned into entities. I could be right. We'll see how this goes. We'll see what happens.
On his face for the man in yellow in the drawing? Yes or no?
I know that there are theories about that, so I'm just going to say stay tuned.
Okay.
And now, based off of their pattern, when he says stay tuned about the scar on the man in yellow's face, we all know that the scar and the mole were actually not intentional details. However, because people in the audience have connected the fact that that might actually mean that the man in yellow was Randall, although it would not make sense because Randall's a Marine, they might use that like they've used things in the past and retcon it into the show. So be prepared if that happens. I'm hoping they're smarter than that and they don't do that. But it could happen based off of his answer to the question on if the man in yellow is Martin. Be prepared.
Is this the accurate comparison right here? Or are these different?
Same answer.
Okay, that's all I needed. Jeff?
Another stay tuned when it comes to whether or not Smiley and the symbol on the wall, the big red symbol, are one and the same. I believe again that this is another opportunity for them to not answer the question because they want to leave it open for if they're going to add this into the show. But I'm going to talk about what I said in my last video, which is that if that thing on the wall is the same thing as Smiley coming out of the sack that Fatima had to give birth to in order for this thing to happen, knowing that Fatima giving birth to Smiley in the first place was a retcon. This opens up another huge world for if they do go on to confirm that the symbol is of that transformation, we have another plot hole on our hands. So I'm hoping that they don't go this route again and not another change that they create in this show and change something later on that now creates a problem. But again, that's something they could potentially do. That's why they don't answer the question. I'm hoping that they don't, fingers crossed. Because again, to explain my logic on that, if Smiley coming out of the sack and being given birth to is the symbol on the wall, that means the symbol on the wall is the physical representation of what transformation all of the monsters went through after sacrificing their children, which means that they had to have at least 10 to 20 pregnant women give birth to all the other monsters at the beginning. That's the only way it makes sense. I don't see how else you would have something coming out of a birthing sac. So keep that in mind, that creates a huge problem for if that's how Smiley was reborn after being killed. That symbol on the wall is not an image of something being reborn after being killed. It is the symbol of how all of the human people were transformed and born into whatever entities they currently are. So keep that in mind on why I'm saying it would not make sense. Now, this section of the video is going to be me revisiting what the writers actually said in detail about what they actually have written, what they don't have, and what it all actually means for the future of this show. So if that's something you're not interested in, go ahead and click off now, go watch another video, go watch somebody else's videos, whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter to me. Do what you want to do. It's your life, right? Now, when it comes to this section of the video, I need to clarify that does not mean I do not like this show. I see that people have a hard time hearing my opinion on this show and separating it from me saying that the show is bad. Those are two completely different things. I'm talking about whether the plot is going to be thorough and detailed and if it all makes sense and if that puts the show in the trajectory of being one of the greatest shows of all time. That does not mean that if it fails to be one of the greatest shows of all time, that it is not a good show. I will still watch the show. I will still make content on the show. I still enjoy the show, regardless of the process that they go through to create it. I'm just putting this out there so that people like me who bought onto this show very early on and thought it had a lot more of an in-depth, detail-oriented plot to itself that was pre-planned and pre-written so that it would all continue to always make sense and that every detail was supposed to line up with the ending of the show, that we keep our expectations in check so that we don't feel even worse than we did after we got the reveals at the end of season 3. Because there's a lot of people who feel the way that I do. And I feel the need to say that in this video because although I get a lot of comments agreeing with me, I get enough comments who do not understand that concept. That I do not speak for everybody, obviously, but I speak for people that I've identified that do understand the things I'm saying in my videos. So if that is not you, that is fine, but that also doesn't negate what I have to say about this show. And what I have to say about this show does not mean the show is bad. Now that we have that out the way, let's talk about what the writers actually say in this interview about whether or not the show is planned.
One of your past interviews, you guys have talked about how you know the ending, right? You already know this ending, you know the path. So for all those people out there, yes, they're not making this up along the way. They have the ending. But my question for you is because I was listening to another writer from The Boys, Eric Kripke, I believe, and he was saying how like he learned. So to be clear,
Yeah.
season 4 script not done yet.
Not done yet.
I put these two clips back to back for a reason. A lot of people saw this section of E-Man's first interview and have been running around the community saying that the writers confirmed that they have always had this story written and finished, which is simply not the case, and they did not even answer this question. E-Man just spoke for them, which I believe was a mistake, but obviously not an intentional one. Again, he's doing all these interviews, but he is not an interviewer. They needed to answer that question. Is it actually finished? When was it finished being written? How many things are they going back to change? And what does that mean for the future of the show? All of those questions get answered in nuance throughout the rest of the interview if you pay close enough attention, which later on all comes down to they have the mythology that they have and want in order. And the mythology predicted the beginning as well as the end of the show. The writing that they've done is come up with different concepts and huge plot points, large plot points, general ideas of what is supposed to happen in the show as they go along. But with every season being filmed, they are changing things as they go. They are still writing the seasons as they go, and they are making things up as they go along. They are putting in intentional seeds in the show, creating more and more plot points and side quests, something they say in this interview. And they're going back to then decide what they do with those plots in order to plug holes that they're creating along the way because the story is not fully written. That is the actual answer that needed to be said out loud by the writers, but instead we did not get that because they were not allowed to answer. But because I watched the entire rest of this interview in depth, in detail, multiple times to make this video, I'm going to show you exactly every piece that adds up to what I'm saying right now.
We know the central mythology. We know how it's going to end. We know most, if not all, of the character journeys along the way. We purposefully leave open a lot of discovery for ourselves and our awesome writers, because otherwise, what would be the point? If we're not finding new things for ourselves, that's what keeps it exciting for us.
Okay.
You know, and one of the things too that was like kind of baked into the design of the show was the idea of creating this ever-expanding canvas. You know, like creating a show that has a mythology and a, you know, kind of in a way creating a modern day fable, or at least striving to create a type of modern day fable.
So we started from a mythology that was very, very thorough, and yet also still had aspects of it that could be filled in. So we had a really solid foundation when it comes to that. We also, from a narrative standpoint, know the ending of the show, as we said, and a lot of the significant events along the way.
Mythology that is thorough, significant events along the way, keeping an open canvas, a modern day fable based off a detailed mythology that they have in mind that predicts how the show is supposed to end. That is what they said. That is not the same thing as a show that has been fully written out in detail from season 1, where every twist, every turn, everything we see in the show, every background detail, and every twist that they add, and every new plot point we get to see was something that had always been planned along the way. That is not the same thing at all.
Well, I know the overall. I know where we end up, and yet I don't know. Like, you know, I know where we're going, so where we arrive. I don't know exactly every little nook and cranny that gets us there. How long it's going to be, because you don't know when you're going to go with one character down the alley that you didn't think he'd be driving or she'd be driving through, where there's a flat tire and a dead body and whatever else there is. And that's the beauty of, I think, creating episodic television these days, especially with the freedom we have on streaming and not network with commercials. you get to go places, even though you know the big picture. You get to go to those little things that happen frequently on Lost, and that was 22 episodes, so there was plenty of room to do that.
Sure.
And we trust each other enormously, and we have reinvented scripts, 2 days before shooting, or scenes or sequences. So it's very collaborative, and the team up there, the production team.
Again, the way that they're creating this show is a perfectly good way to do so. Again, does not negate the fact that this is a good show, but it does make us right. There are a section of the community and the viewership of the show who could figure that out based off of watching what we watch, because some of these twists and some of these answers did not seem like they were well thought out. They seemed like last minute changes, and then there were some last minute changes that led to plot holes. That is why we felt that way. So again, the way they're creating the show is not the problem. And the viewers who picked up on that this is the way that they're creating the show is not the problem. But the problem is that if you're going to create the show this way, it would have been nice to know that from the beginning and not be gaslit into thinking from other creators that the show is fully finished being written. And hopefully by the end of this show, that regardless of what they add and what they change, everything gets answered.
And to go to the idea of how we parse out when exactly we do certain things, that's also like a very organic process. For example, we always knew that Tabitha was going to wake up in the real world. In the original design, that was going to happen at the end of the penultimate season. But in breaking season 2, we said let's speed up the timetable. Let's have that happen at the end of season 2, because everything that's interesting is going to happen after that. So it's like as opposed to saving the really cool thing, we moved it up a couple seasons, and we know where we want to get to, and we try not to get too stuck on but we weren't going to do that until ... as opposed to saying ooh, wouldn't that be cool if we did that now? And what kind of corner would that paint us into? And how much great stuff is coming after that? So I think we try to keep it as organic as possible. And even with the it's always sort of about what's going to give us the best momentum and what's going to really sort of feel the most organic and surprising in terms of getting places in the narrative that we know we need to get.
Momentum. They're changing things as they go for momentum. One of the biggest things he pointed to that they changed for momentum, what he was talking about in this clip, is that Tabitha was never supposed to get out of Fromville until later on in the penultimate season. We don't know how many seasons there actually are, so we can't actually predict what number the penultimate season is going to be. But we can guess around 4 or 5, considering that there's an estimated guess that this show will make it to at least 5 seasons. Now, this is a harmless change to create momentum until you go back knowing that that was not supposed to be there. Now you can see how that is not necessarily the greatest change. That we went in, that when we got Tabitha getting out of Fromville, it now no longer makes sense on why she got out of Fromville at that point. Then you can start to see how many things got changed along the way, basically including who came back to Fromville with her. We don't know if Acosta was a planned character. There's so many more things now that are wide open for them to now have to justify on why these things happened and change in the story. That again is starting to get more and more layered and more things that they're going to have to figure out how to answer in 2 more seasons at best, if maybe 3 or 4.
The return of Smiley, I would say that's we put the pieces in place. We put certain pieces in place knowing that they are going to afford us opportunities down the road. We may not always know exactly how those opportunities are going to pay off, but everything we do, we're doing. And again, this is the benefit of kind of knowing where we're going and knowing what the overarching journey looks like. There are certain times where we will plan things and we will pay them off exactly as we anticipate. There will be other times where we do something under the auspices of where we're heading, and we're not exactly sure how we're going to pay off, but we know we've got a lot of really cool options for how we can do this later. And so it's always a really nice mix of. I think one of the trickiest things about doing a show like this is just being very comfortable in the discomfort of not always knowing exactly what you're going to do next, but knowing that you've laid the groundwork that you can rely on going.
Talked about it. It's sort of like you leave breadcrumbs behind. It's important for us to be mindful of the breadcrumbs we've left, and we know that they're there. We're not entirely sure how they're going to pay off, but then when we find an opportunity, it's like, oh yeah, remember that thing that we did back in season 2? This is what it means. And
again, this is a way to do things, but it is very dangerous. It is dangerous to build up this show off of mythology and off of a very, very complicated concept, and then change things as you go along based off of how you feel about the things that are happening in the show, Prioritizing the drama, obviously, of this show over the actual plot and the mythology is one way to do things, but now it has created issues. One of the biggest issues, which is mentioned in this clip, is the birth of Smiley, something I've talked about in more than enough of my videos at this point, so it's not something I'm going to continue to harp on. They will hopefully answer it and retcon the plot hole that it has now created at some point later down the line. But for context in this video and on why Fatima giving birth to Smiley is the plot hole that it is because Fatima knew for a while before Smiley ever died that she was pregnant. This is easy to miss, but it is truly logical. Fatima asked for a pregnancy test the day Smiley died, while Ellis was in the medical bay being given the blood transfusion. You don't all of a sudden ask for a pregnancy test because a couple hours ago you figured out you might be pregnant, especially not in the middle of the night. Fatima was displaying symptoms of something was wrong with her for almost about 2 episodes, I believe, off the top of my head, long before Smiley was ever a thing, before the worms were even conceptualized as a weapon, before Ellis even got stabbed. Long before this. That's why she was acting the way that she was acting for all of the episodes leading up to this. She already knew there was a potential that she was pregnant, and she was starting to freak out and think about the reality of what it would be like to be pregnant in Fromville. That's why she changed. That's why she started breaking down. That's what Ellis was talking about when he said, there's something wrong. I finally saw something inside of her break. That's what he was talking about. She goes on to ask for a pregnancy test that night, meaning that she knew for a while and now she's ready to ask for a test because things are getting too real and she really needs to know. So now that you know, based off canon, she knew she was pregnant. Smiley died after this, which means that regardless of the mental gymnastics you're getting prepared to type in my comments, until they explain it canonically, it is a plot hole. It is a plot hole.
You know, when I'll text Jeff, or Jeff will text me like at midnight and be like, "Oh, what?" Da, 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 you know, or we're on Zoom together, and you'll clap like a little kid because something just occurred to you. You know, like those are the surprising moments that you don't get to have if you get too sort of militaristic about planning everything out in advance, every little nook and cranny. You end up putting blinders on, and you.
Yes, they are right that if you try to be militaristic about your plot and your storyline, that you rob yourself of the ability to adjust. Adjusting a plot to things that need to be changed once it's finished, again, is still different from what they're actually describing. They're describing leaving a plot so loosely open that they have the ability to do whatever they want. And the problem with that is that if doing whatever they wanted had some rules and a little bit more of a structure to it, we might not have some of the issues we're seeing now where certain things are just super confusing. Certain plot lines seem like they're dragging out and they don't have any answers. Certain things are not making sense. Certain twists don't quite add up. And now we have things that have gotten answers that create plot holes. A lot of people in my comments, and myself included, paid so close attention to this show that we knew they were changing things as they went. And an added effect of a lot of people, including creators and viewers, which I do not blame them, turned around and villainized all the people who caught this and are failing to read between the lines of what was actually said in these interviews and are going on to push content saying that the writers confirmed that this story has been written and acting like some of us were wrong when we weren't. Because we all know, both the people who thought it was planned and the people who knew it wasn't planned and that something was wrong, that this show, the show we watched in season 1, was so detail oriented, or needed to be, that we all wanted it to be something that has always been planned. Every detail, every twist, every turn was already thought of. Every detail they put in the show actually meant something, and that the show was detail oriented, because now we all know that if that's not the case, that opens up for a can of worms where this show could potentially not end the way it needs to and leave a lot of things unanswered and leave a lot of plot holes, too many things up for interpretation and mental gymnastics in order to make sense, and will ruin the end of this show.
Or intended to mean something later, but the audience is like, look, this was, of course, now those things always meant that. We'll take credit for connections that the audience has made because of course, like those are the happy accidents that happen when, always it's things that I've loved that, like, yes, of course, like when there's synchronicity and things just line up perfectly that you never planned it, that's the way the universe works. And that's the way that, making things like this.
Smiley is definitely kind of Boyd's grandson at this point. And the My Blood is Your Blood was very intentional for the story that we were telling at the time. And I think has sort of acted as kind of like this little bit of a happy accident and a little bit of a
Here's something, and if John gets mad at me, we can cut this out. Genuinely, John gets mad, we can cut this out. For instance, we've known from jump that the creatures were promised eternal life. Did we know that Fatima was going to give birth to a creature before we started telling season 1? No. That came up along the way. Did we know it was going to be Smiley? No, that came up along the way. But we've been looking from the beginning for how do you dramatize that the creatures have eternal life instead of just saying it out loud. And we were really mindful that was a creative problem we were going to have to solve. And that was always in the forefront of our mind. And then you start thinking, like, what's the best thing that can happen to a character in this place? Oh, she couldn't get pregnant, and then she does. That's a gift. And then, of course, we have to sour that gift. And then you see the opportunity, like, oh, I know what she's giving birth to. This is the way that the character narrative, the emotion, the plot, the mythology are all going to come together. And those are the kind of moments that, as John said, really excite us. And so, there's planning and there's happy accidents that occur along the way.
So there you have it laid out for you word by word, that Fatima being pregnant was planned later on. And then Fatima's pregnancy resulting in her giving birth to a monster planned later on. And then her eventually giving birth to Smiley specifically added again later on. All of these things were changed along the way. And they've coined the term happy accidents for all of the foreshadowing and details people thought they caught that meant that this was supposed to happen when it never was supposed to be that until later. Again, all the people who are predicting otherwise were not wrong. All the people have been saying up until season 3 mainly is when most of this stuff started to bubble up, that it seems like they're making things up as they go and some of these plot twists do not make sense. We're not wrong, because they are changing things along the way and they're making all of these plots and side quests that they then go back later on to use and retcon into different plots. And then on top of that, there's certain details we're catching that aren't meaning what we think that they mean. For example, the worms in Boy's whole plot has nothing to do with Fatima's pregnancy. That is not the answer to why Fatima is pregnant in the first place. That is not the answer to how Fromville took her baby, and is not the answer to why Fatima gave birth to Smiley, but they're going with it because it is a fan theory. And to finish this off, I want to lead with that point.
I've heard so many cool theories from people about why the show is named from. And, there's absolutely, for me, there's a reason that I named it from, that word. And what I've always said is that, like, that word is just a loaded word that gets to the mystery of all things. You know what I mean? Like, that's as far as I'm willing to go, because, like, anything more prescriptive than that, if Jeff or I say, like, oh, this is why it's called from, then that becomes why it's called from. And it's just like, there's so much, there are answers that you want to give, and then there are questions that are more interesting than the answers themselves. And I think the idea of, like, what from means to an individual viewer is much more interesting than what it means to me or Jeff.
The questions are more interesting than the answers. It is still a great show. It is still a good show. It is still a show worth watching. It is still a show worth discussing, theorizing, all of these great things. But this is not a show that has been written from the beginning and has all of its details, turns, twists, and everything explained and connected. They want us to theorize what is happening on this show without there actually being anything planned yet, because it is more interesting than the show that they're actually coming up with to an extent, because they're coming up with it as they go along. And they are seeing some of the things people are saying, and they might use it in the show, regardless of what that means for the plot itself. And on top of it, the last thing I want to say, and then we're done talking about this, is that the mythology of the show, even though it is written so that they know what the ending of the show is, and it is a very detailed mythology, whatever that mythology actually is, does not negate the fact that some of the things they're changing along the way might affect the mythology. And I'm praying to God that that does not completely distract and detract from the actual show we end up getting once the show is completely done being shot, filmed, written, and put out for the world to see. The last episode of the last season hopefully gives us all the answers we will be looking for. So that's it. This video is way longer than I thought it was going to be, but I'm going to leave it all in here because I need you guys to hear what I have to say in order for things to continue to make sense moving forward. I hope you guys really enjoyed this long video because I put a lot of effort into it and I'm exhausted, but also too, I think we all needed this reset because there were so many things happening, so many things being said about the show that were starting to become too much. And I'm glad that they did these interviews to start debunking some of the things that were being said. But I'm also on the same page of like, well, now we know that a lot of us were right about how we were feeling about this show seems to be making things up along the way and changing as they go. How you feel about some of the changes that were made is up to you. How you feel about the show now that you have answers is up to you. Me personally, even with all this critique, nothing and nobody is perfect at the end of the day. This show is still a great show. It's just not what I thought it was, which was a mythology and a story that was already finished. It is simply a mythology and a loose script that is finished. So look forward to my future videos to try to put together some of the things we have now discovered about this show. And I'll see you guys